Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. Hope everybody is doing well this Monday morning. It's August the 24th, 2020. Well, this should be an interesting topic. Good morning to those of you who are joining. Lyle and Wayne, glad to see you, and others who are not commenting, but you're watching the live stream. Appreciate you being on here today. If you have any questions or comments while we're going through this study together today, please feel free to add it in the comments section here. On Christianity and politics. Well, this is a subject that, well, how do I say it? I guess, for some Christians, leave it alone. They don't want to talk about it. And I think that's part of the problem. This is just where I'm going to start. I think that's part of the problem. I mean, we live in a extremely polarized society at the moment, and it's been going on for some time. I think one thing that makes it worse, really, than it is, and not that it's not bad, because it is bad, but I think one thing that makes things worse than they really are is a couple of different things. One, I would say social media. Social media has brought a lot of things to the forefront that, before the days of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you didn't really see, you didn't really hear. So I think social media has contributed to the divide, to the amplification of the problems. But I think also something else that's contributed to the division and I don't know what all the right words to use would be. The hatred, the vitriol, all these words that come to my mind in terms of discussing politics is our 24-hour news cycle. I mean, we have companies that exist for the express purpose of keeping us up to date 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And, that's relatively a new thing. It's really not that old. You think of institutions like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. That's what they exist for. And I really do believe that the divide that exists, the animosity, the vitriol, the hatred, I really do believe that those two sources, media and social media, contribute to all of that stuff. I think another thing that contributes to all of the division and all the issues that exist would be the inability to discuss things logically. Because here's the thing, we've been told for years that you never talk about politics and religion. Don't talk about politics, you can talk about anything else. There was even a song, I remember when I was a kid, I can't remember, it's a country song, I think it was Sammy Kershaw. One of those, sad songs. Talk about anything but politics, religion, and her. That's been the mindset for a couple of generations now. I think it's changing, and it should change. But, hey, let's not talk about that. We don't want to cause any division, so on and so forth. The fact that people hold that view, that we shouldn't talk about politics and religion, has contributed to the reality now that people don't know how to talk about politics and religion. So there are a lot of things that are on my mind along these lines. So I want to talk about Christianity and politics. And here's one thing that, believe it or not, this is true. America's not the only country in the world. I think sometimes we think we are. We are not. There are different forms of government, different forms of politics throughout the world. And I'm going to spend a little time about that, maybe a little bit of civics time this morning in this live stream. The United States of America is unique. It really is, in the sense that it's a constitutional republic. I mean, how many of you, so I'm showing right now, I've got 16 on the live stream. Comment, feel free to answer this. How many of you have heard, particularly over the last couple of decades, and probably even a smaller amount of time than that, but how many of you constantly hear about the fact that we live in a democracy? I mean, you hear it every single day from politicians. We live in a democracy. I think this is one of the problems for not only for Christians, but also for citizens in general. They don't even know what form of government we are in this country. And that's kind of astounding to me. The United States is a constitutional republic. It's not a democracy. And if you want to define those terms, understand the difference between those two. In a democracy, a simple majority rules, okay? 51-49. That, out of 150, that's the simple majority, and it rules. That's the essence of a democracy. A constitutional republic, or a federal republic, if you will, such as the United States, does not depend on a simple majority vote of 51-49. It's based on representation from all of the 50 states. So I don't want to get into this, but it's interesting to talk about. For instance, so we're coming up on a national election, presidential election. Okay? The Electoral College. Each state has a certain amount of representatives. They get a certain amount of votes, and the electors determine who is going to represent them. Okay, on a state level in Washington, then of course through the vote for the President of the United States on a national level. Again, in a simple democracy, a simple majority rules, 51-49. The United States is not a democracy. It's a constitutional republic or a federal republic. There are a couple of different things you could call it. People don't even know that, who are involved in the political process, or maybe some do know it, and they'd prefer it if they had a simple democracy. And I'll just give you, for instance, and this is not siding with anything. I'm just showing you. I'm just giving you an example of what I'm talking about. So last week we had the DNC, the Democratic National Convention. This week we're going to have the RNC, the Republican National Convention. So let me say this first. The Constitution that we have. Here's the thing that I think people forget sometimes. The citizens forget. The Constitution limits the power of government. It limits the power and scope of government. That's what it's designed to do. What we are often presented with, though, is that the Constitution limits the power of the citizen. And it's completely backwards. So, again, there's a lot of civics involved here. It's often presented that they're the ones in power. Okay, so just for instance, a couple years ago, this freshman congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was talking about this thing. And one of the statements she made was, basically, who's going to do anything? She said, you elected me, I'm the boss, I'm in charge. You're not in charge. That's the kind of ignorance and arrogance that exists throughout the political realm. She thinks that she's in charge when she was put there by the voters, and she's supposed to be meeting the wishes and the will of the people who put her in office. But in her small little mind, she thinks she's the boss. So, I mean, that's just a for instance of what I'm talking about, that so many people, even involved in the political process, don't get. So we are in the midst of watching the Democrats and the Republicans serve up a bunch of red meat. I mean, that's what these national conventions are for. It's for revving up the base. It's for getting people excited. We have to understand that. They're going to be talking to the people primarily that are already voting for them, that they already have their support, things of this nature. So we have to understand that. We have to appreciate that. We understand why they're doing it. They want to get votes. They want to keep their votes. They want to keep their power and things of this nature. The fact of the matter is, if you're a person who votes Democrat or a person who votes Republican, you're going to watch either one of those things, and you're going to agree with one side and you're going to disagree with the other. It's kind of cheap politics. I mean, let's just call it for what it is. So among Christians, there are varying views here. All right. Well, you shouldn't be involved in politics at all because it is what I was just talking about. It's a bunch of red meat. It's people giving their talking points and things of this nature. Some people say it's okay to vote and be involved. And then there are others who take it to the extreme of, well, we need to be political activists. We need to be out in the streets. We need to be doing sit-ins. We need to be out marching. So there are varying degrees, and I'm not condemning or condoning any of those. I'm just saying here's what exists. Okay, these are the three particularly that I've seen. So here's a good comment. The United States is both a republic and a democracy. Specifically, the United States is a constitutional federal republic with a strong democratic tradition and many democratic elements, especially on a local level. And that's absolutely an accurate statement, especially on the local level. Despite the democratic elements and traditions, the U.S. is not, however, a direct democracy where people vote on laws directly. Exactly. So thank you for saying that, Joe. Very, very good words there. So anyway, there are varying views among Christians about what our involvement should be in the political process. Again, here's the three primaries, the three primary views. So in terms of Christianity and politics, I wonder if we realize the extent to which the Bible addresses this topic. And the passages I just put up here are by no means all the passages. These are just a few scriptures from the New Testament. John the Baptizer, and I really like this passage because I think it addresses those who say, well, Christians shouldn't have any role in politics. When John the Baptizer came on the scene teaching his message, people came to him asking, okay, so what do we need to do? You know, he came preaching a baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. He was preparing people for the kingdom of God. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. The Messiah is coming. I'm not the Messiah. I'm not even worthy to untie his shoes. But anyway, people come to him asking him questions, and here's his response. The tax collectors came to be baptized and said to him, Teacher, what shall we do? Listen to his response. Well, you need to get out of government. You have no spot in government. No. Collect no more than what's appointed for you. He tells them to do their job and do it honestly. Verse 14, likewise the soldiers asked him. Okay, so in that day and time, we're talking law enforcement. All right, what do? Do not intimidate anyone or accuse falsely, and be content with your wages. So the idea that spiritually minded people shouldn't be involved in the political process runs counter to not only the preaching of John the Baptizer, but also the preaching of Jesus. And the one passage I have up here from Jesus is Matthew 22, when people come to him and say, hey, is it lawful to pay taxes unto Caesar or not? And he says, I want to see a coin. All right, whose image is on here? Well, it's Caesar's. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and to God what's God's. Fulfill your civic duties. Pay your taxes. All right? Paul says that same thing. And I'm going to spend some time in Romans chapter 13 today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over there. This is probably the most frequently used passage in this discussion of Christianity and politics. So just a couple more comments coming in here. One person says, I don't vote party. I vote for who is close to my values, and I won't vote for anyone who is for abortion, period. If we don't vote, we may soon find ourselves in a country against religion. So again, and here's another thing. And again, some of this is me, all right? Some of this is just me talking, and I can't Bible it, all right? So we have primarily a two-party system in the United States of America. We have two major parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. If you understand the backdrop of why the founders gave us the form of government that they gave us, where you have three co-equal branches of government. You have the executive branch, which, the president, his cabinet. You have the legislative branch, the lawmaking branch, and you have the judicial branch. Okay, the Supreme Court, federal courts, things of this nature, the branches of government that enforce the laws. The judicial branch. If you understand where the founders came from, the form of government they endured, the persecution that was involved, the state-sponsored church that was involved, and things of this nature, you will have a better understanding of why we have this form of government. As Joe said, a constitutional federal republic with a strong democratic tradition and elements on a local level. But see, the problem is a lot of people don't know, or it's not maybe that they don't know, it's that they don't appreciate where the founding fathers came from and why they gave us the form of government that we have. Now, one of their fears was, and you can go back and read among the founders, one of their fears was the two-party system tearing each other apart and striving for the ultimate control. So this idea of voting for party, and I've heard this my whole life. Well, I'm a Democrat. Well, I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. And here's one. I'm a libertarian. You know, most every election you'll have a third party candidate, whether it's an independent or a libertarian or a Green Party candidate. The fact of the matter is you're throwing your vote away in this country. I mean, that's just the reality. It counts for nothing. Because until that party gets somewhere with any recognizable size, it's worthless. You know, people can come on the scene and have these great plans, but they have, I mean, that's it. It'll last for a few months and then it's over. So anyway, Romans chapter 13 talks extensively about not only the role of government, but the Christian's responsibility in view of the role of government. So I'll just start reading here, Romans 13:1. Let every soul, so this doesn't apply just to Christians. This is a universal command, all right? Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment upon themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise of the same. So let me stop right there in Romans 13 and verse 3, okay? Let me say something here. You look around our country right now, all the major cities that are quite literally on fire. A lot of this stuff stems from so-called systemic racism, racial injustice. That's a whole nother topic. Racism is real. Anybody that denies the existence of racism is not living in reality. However, those who constantly harp on the idea of social or societal or structural racism is also living in a fairy tale land. That's not what I'm talking about today, but I mean that's just for real. But you look around at all these events that are taking place in our country today, and the looting, the rioting, the burning, the beatings that people are taking in streets. You look at things like a few weeks ago, that the CHOP zone in, what was it, Seattle? A lot of these things stem from wickedness among the population and their desire for control, and they want to do a lot of things that they want to resist the power. I mean, that's what it's all about. This movement is about resistance. Scripture tells us that the governing authorities exist by the ordinance of God. That does not mean that God approves of everything that is done. And I think we need to make that clear. And no Christian stands for everything that is done regardless. You know, sin is sin. Evil is evil. Okay, murder is murder. Racism is racism. We can talk about all that stuff. The big picture here is, though, that government, the fact that government itself exists, it exists by the will of God. And if you resist that, if you're a person who's trying to build your own little autonomous zone somewhere, you are resisting the ordinance of God. Period. I mean, there's no debate for that. And that's what I was saying in the beginning. You know, the United States of America is not the only country in the world, and a constitutional federal republic is not the only form of government in the world. All right? A Christian can live under any form of government. They could live under a simple democracy. They could live under an absolute dictatorship. You think of North Korea, places like China, things like this that are absolutely corrupt. The Christian can live under any form of government and still be a Christian. And I think sometimes as American citizens, we think, well, God gave us a federal republic, and this is the form of government God wants. That's not what it's about. It's about how we conduct ourselves in any setting. And so we need to familiarize ourselves with that understanding. This is the biblical concept. Rome was not a federal constitutional republic like we have today. Anyway, kind of got off the subject there. If you resist, you're resisting God himself. 4, getting back to Romans 13 and verse 4. 4, he is God's minister. Who? The governing authorities. And actually the word minister there is diakonos. Deacon, he's God's servant. For you for good. If you do evil, be afraid. Now, here's what happens a lot, particularly in social media craze in the United States of America. We'll see some event that takes place. Somebody's gotten out their phone. Some altercation takes place between a policeman and just frankly, within the context of the United States of America right now, between a policeman and a black individual. And a person will have out their phone and they'll record a certain portion of it, and they'll even edit the video to make it look like something happened that didn't happen. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, and I understand that. But this happens on a regular basis. And immediately people jump out and say, oh, this happened, and they don't have half the facts that they need. Let me give you, for instance, Ferguson, Missouri, a few years ago, the Michael Brown killing. Hands up, don't shoot. Okay, y'all remember that? Hands up, don't shoot. I mean, that's what came out. You had NFL teams coming out on the field, hands up, don't shoot. You had a whole movement based on that. And then after months of investigation and months of testimony from witnesses, both black and white, that was all proven to be a lie. But we bought into it. American culture bought into it because that's what appeared to happen. That's what I was saying earlier. Social media and the media platforms of America really play into the misunderstandings and the misinformation that's out there. So again, listen to Romans chapter 13. If you do evil, be afraid. So I pulled the Michael Brown example. Why? Because as witnesses testified, he was inside a police officer's window, punching him in the face and reaching for his gun. What do you think is going to happen? And he had just robbed a store, okay? What do you think is going to happen if you approach a police officer's car, he's sitting there in the car, you punch him in the face and reach for his gun? What do you expect him to do? So we keep reading here in Romans chapter 13, verse 4. If you do evil, be afraid. Now listen to this. For he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. It's evil to rob a store. It's evil to punch an officer in the face and try to take his gun. So I'm not talking about necessarily any one particular event and trying to justify everything that happened. I'm just telling you that there are evil people in the world who resist the governing authorities. But then we buy into a lie because we see a partial video on social media and we think that's what happened, and we don't have a clue what happened. So many people buy into this. So Romans 13 talks about this. You submit to the authorities. That doesn't mean we approve of everything they do. That doesn't mean we believe everything they believe. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 to 17 talks about the very same thing. Some policies are indifferent to our faith when we're talking about politics. So again, we're in the middle of the DNC, and the RNC starts tonight, all right? Some policies that politicians hold, environmentalism, protecting the earth, things like that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, to some people, that's become a god. Okay? There are people who have done interviews that said, we've decided not to have children because we don't want to harm the environment. How stupid can you get? I mean, it just blows my mind how dumb sometimes people can be. All right? Some policies are indifferent to our faith. Taxation. We may not like higher taxes, but you know what? It really doesn't affect my faith. Now, if I refuse to pay taxes, that's a sin. I mean, read Romans chapter 13, verses 6 and 7. But there are some policies that are not indifferent to our faith. Write down a list. We can talk about them. We could go back and forth about them and all of this. But there are some policies that are absolutely not indifferent to our faith. And Christians ought to be deeper thinkers so they can see beyond, the way I put it here, so they can see beyond the platitudes of politicians. What's a platitude? That's a platitude is basically a statement that's been around a long time and that it's overused and it has no original thought to it. So let me give you an illustration. How many times, and both parties do this, and I'm so sick of hearing it, I'm fighting for the working man. No, you're not. That's a political platitude. That may sound good to some people. That may appeal to younger voters who haven't been around for a while. Oh, they're fighting for me. No, they're not. Christians ought to be deeper thinkers than to buy into silliness like that. I got in trouble for this one the other day, but I'm going to say it again anyway. How about tokenism? And here's what I mean by tokenism. Tokenism is not, I understand it's used in a racial way, but it's applied across the board. Think about, and both parties do this. Both political parties do this. Well, we need a woman to do this. Why? Now, if she's qualified, okay, great, perfect. I mean that was the big thing for Joe Biden's running mate. He needs to pick a woman of color. If she's qualified, okay, perfect. But that's a political platitude. Why does he need to pick a woman of color? I don't have any issue with that. I mean, our country, for 8 years, the country, and by a large margin, voted for a black man, Barack Obama. Okay. But political platitudes are kind of, they're just old. I mean, can you not think any deeper than I'm fighting for you, or we need a woman to do this, or a person of color to do this? Is that all your politics are? Is virtue signaling and identity politics? Christians need to be a little bit deeper than what things look like, what they appear to be. Some policies are not. Now, we look at our two-party system in this country, and there are two issues that, in my mind, my opinion, absolutely ought to affect the Christian vote. Now, if a person decides not to vote, that's up to them. They don't have to vote. I'm of the opinion that a Christian should be involved in government. I mean, think about it. If we have the opportunity to vote in a country and every Christian said, no, I can't be involved in government, guess what? Guess what you're going to get? And it's exactly what you asked for. There are two, what's the word I'm looking for? Policies. Yeah, two policies that no Christian can ever vote for. Abortion, and what's become, years ago we just used to talk about homosexuality. Well, now it's the LGBTQA plus movement. And the acronym keeps getting longer, if you've ever noticed. It used to just be LGB. Then it's LGBTQ and LGBTQA plus. They just keep adding to it. Now we're in a debate in our country about pedophilia and how that's normal. And minor attracted persons is a thing now. It just keeps building. And if Christians take the view of, I can't be involved in politics, then you're getting exactly what you asked for. Don't complain about it. Don't be surprised. So let me say this. So number one, I said Christians ought to be deeper thinkers so they can see beyond the platitudes of politicians. Number two, we ought to be deeper than to say, you know what, God's in control anyway, so it doesn't matter how I vote. And I've actually seen Christians making that argument lately. We have, a political season coming up. Well, God's in control. I'm a Democrat. God's in control. I'm a Republican. How shallow can you be? I mean, that's as shallow as you can get. Can you not think for yourself? Look at their policies. If the person you say you support, if their platform is, quote unquote, women's health care, which is abortion, let's just call it for what it is. Politicians have cleaned up the language. They make it sound so much better. Women's health care. That's abortion. That's what they're talking about. If you support a candidate who supports that, guess what? You support abortion, period. And you can't say, well, God's in control. I know He's in control. But you are casting your lot with that person or with that party because you're of this political affiliation or you're of this political affiliation. That is so shallow and ungodly. And I see Christians all over social media saying, well, God's in control, so it doesn't matter. Okay. You ever read 1 Samuel chapter 8? Israel wanted a king. Samuel, the prophet, said, listen, you don't want this. You don't want this. And in conference with God, God told Samuel, listen, they've not rejected you. They've rejected me. Give them what they want. And as you read all of 1 Samuel chapter 8, I'm going to turn over there just real quick. I believe that's in the Old Testament. 1 Samuel chapter 8. So you have that discussion between Samuel and the people in the first few verses, and then you have the discussion between Samuel and God, beginning in verse 10. And God says, Samuel, let them have it. But you tell them this is how your king's going to behave. Samuel tells them that, and then you have this response in 1 Samuel 8:19. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may rule us and go out before us and fight our battles. And so verse 22, the Lord said to Samuel, heed their voice and make them a king. What does God say? Let them go. Let them do what they want to do. Christians in politics. Sadly, sometimes it's ugly because we've been taught for so long you can't talk about religion and politics. Well, guess what? Now we have a couple generations of people who don't know how to talk about religion and politics, and they think that religion and politics don't even mix. So think about this. From what can you separate your Christianity? How can you compartmentalize your life where you have your Christianity here and then something else here and then something else here, and you don't mix them? Where did we ever get that concept from Scripture? We don't. Again, Luke 3, Matthew 22, Romans 13, 1 Peter chapter 2, and more than that. That's just a few passages. Again, there are some issues in our politics that are indifferent to our faith. All right? Doesn't matter. There are others that absolutely do. And when I, as a Christian, have the opportunity to let my voice be heard by voting, I need to think about where I am casting my vote. I don't vote. Okay, so I'm a Christian. I'm conservative. I'm conservative not because I'm this or that politically. In fact, I'm a registered independent. I'm not registered with either major political party. I don't vote down party line. I look at the issues. So many people are caught up in making history, okay, just for instance. And again, this is nothing racial on my part. I'm just saying a lot of people in 2008 voted for Barack Obama because he would be the first black president. I mean, that's just a fact. And we voted for him twice as a nation. I didn't vote for him because I disagreed with his policies. I don't care what he looks like. You have to be a pretty shallow person to vote for a person because they have dark skin. I mean, that's shallow, and I would say even that's sinful. Christians have to be deeper thinkers than that. We can't be caught up in the silly platitudes of people who are seeking power, like, I'm going to fight for you. No, you're not. You're going to fight. I mean, think about this process with me for just a minute. Now, I know I'm going over time here, but so a term for the President of the United States is 4 years. All right? They're voted on in November. They're put into office if they win the election in January. And they are in power for 4 years. Do we even consider, for some reason we think that a president has all the answers and can change everything in 4 years. The people he goes to work with in Washington have been there for 20, 30, 40 years making the laws. That's the legislative branch's job, to write the laws. You think that a person who's going to be there for 4 years, he's going to fix everything and make everything great? You're fooling yourself. That's not how the system's set up. Now, we also need to understand one of the biggest, and I think we forget about this too sometimes, one of the biggest things we need to understand about voting for a president is one of the powers he has is to appoint judges. Federal judges, Supreme Court justices, the judicial branch of our government. So many people are caught up in the platitudes. They have no depth of knowledge. They don't know their history, their civics at all. But hey, I'm a Republican, so I'm going to vote Republican. Or I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to vote Democrat. And they don't have the depth of mind to look into the policies. Again, I don't care what a person looks like. I don't care if it's a male or a female. Who cares? Are they going to do things that are good for this country? Or is their platform going to be based on those two issues that no Christian can support? Abortion and again, what is it? LGBTQA plus. I think I got it right there. And here's the fact of the matter. We have two political parties in this country. One political party supports both of those. The Democrat Party. The Republican Party is getting more on board with the LGBTQA plus movement. There's no question about that. And the legalization of gay marriage and things of this nature. But when you look at the difference in the parties, the Republican Party is against abortion. And I know